All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started then. The teaching this week is creatively called Keep Calm and Endure Until the End. I don't know if you guys remember during ye olden days of COVID, it was kind of a pop culture thing. I guess it came out of the UK. They had these graphics everywhere, posters and stuff, keep calm and do this, and keep calm and do that. And where I work to this day in the kitchen area, they have one of those signs that says keep calm and wash your hands. So like every time I go to get a coffee or something there, I'm reminded of all of that from 2020 and 21. So, but I thought it'd be interesting here because the idea of enduring till the end is something that if we can keep calm is the best thing to do. Obviously that doesn't always happen, but we're going to kind of focus in on this, on like what it means to endure. I'm going to start off and we're going to read some whole chapters here. We're going to start off with Mark 13 to kind of set the tone. And this could easily be like Luke 21 or Matthew 24. It's the Olivet Discourse. They're all parallel to each other. But if you've done a kind of study of the Synoptic Gospels, you kind of start to see that the wording is different. Some will have phrases that others don't, and they're not exact matches. And so I wanted to focus in on the Mark because the wording kind of encompasses these concepts that we're going to get into today and sets this up. Normally I start in the Old Testament, but we're going to start off with a bunch of readings from the New Testament today and then go back to the Old Testament, and we'll see why as we go. So Mark 13, we're going to read the whole chapter. As he was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, behold what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Yahshua said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another which will not be torn down." And as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew were questioning him privately. "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things are going to be fulfilled?" Yahshua began to say to them, "See to it that no one misleads you. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and will mislead many." And I just want to pause real quick there. The common interpretation of this that I've always seen is like me coming along and saying, "Hey guys, I'm the Messiah. I'm Christ. Follow me." Logically speaking, how many people would follow somebody that came along and did that? Like if Joe Biden or Donald Trump just said, "Hey, I'm the Messiah, follow me," these great political figures, nobody's going to buy it. So when I read this is talking about people saying that he is the Messiah. The actual Messiah is the Messiah. And, within the realms of Christendom, that's everybody. So it makes sense that, deception would be rife in a situation like that where people are pointing to his authority, but the message and the actions that come behind that appeal to his authority are not in line with his authority. So just something to consider if you haven't thought of it that way before. To me, that's how it reads, and that's how it makes the most sense. Okay, so verse 7, "When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be frightened. Those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will also be famines. These things are merely the beginning of the birth pangs." And having done multiple home births, I know that this is a long process. Some women show up at the hospital and they sneeze and out comes the baby, and some women take days. And so you never know until it happens. Every pregnancy is different. And but the birth pangs, that's where you start to kind of feel like, okay, it's showtime. Let's get this party started. Let's move along. But for some women, the birth pangs can go on, like I said, for days. I'm not saying that because we have any experience with that, even though we do. My poor wife, but she endured. She endured till the end. Anyway, so let's see. We were in verse 9. "But be on your guard, for they will deliver you to the courts. You'll be flogged in the synagogues." Imagine that, being flogged in the synagogues. In modern times, that would be our churches here in America typically. We do have synagogues, but the vast majority are churches. "You will stand before governors and kings for my sake as a testimony to them. The good news must be first preached to all the nations." And of course, that goes into the gospel of the kingdom. The reason it has to be preached to all the nations is because, at least the way I summarize the gospel, I go back to Jeremiah 31, where he says, "He who scattered Israel will gather him." To me, that's the gospel in one sentence. So all of this bad news in the scriptures about Israel being divided into two kingdoms and then scattered from the land and the diaspora, it's going to be ultimately reversed and upended. And the culmination we see in detail in Ezekiel 37 about the two sticks becoming one. There's going to be one king. There's no longer two kingdoms. And the gospel, the good news, is the mechanism for how that comes to play. Verse 11, when they arrest you and hand you over, do not worry beforehand. Do not worry beforehand about what you're going to say, but say whatever is given you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but it is the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. And so we're just going to pause right there because that's pivotal. Will be hated by all because of his name. So when I hear name, I don't just think his name is Yahshua or Yeshua or Yehoshua or the different Hebrew variations that we pronounce, or in the mainstream Jesus, because his name is so much more than that. His name is authority, it's reputation, it's sovereignty, all of these things. And I always say you can't live in two kingdoms simultaneously. There is a transition period between kingdoms, but you can't fully function in two kingdoms at once. You can't serve two masters. You'll love one and hate the other, that kind of thing. And so when we look at people like us who are hopefully yielding to his authority and submitting to that kingdom and its ways, the world is going to hate us because we're submitting to that authority. It doesn't have to do with how we pronounce, like, oh no, I said the name Jesus, or oh no, I said the name Yahshua, therefore everybody hates my guts. People do that all the time, and they're popular. We have high-ranking politicians here, Europe, around the world who are, they wear their faith on their sleeve Christians, and they don't get persecuted. So to me, it comes down to the actual sovereignty that we're submitting to here. Verse 14, but when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand. That's parenthetical. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one who is on the housetop must not go down or go in to get anything out of his house. And the one who is in the field must not turn back to get his coat. This is why we have bug-out bags. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that it may not happen in the winter. For those days will be a time of tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the creation, which Elohim created until now and never will. So to sum that up, this is going to be the worst time in all of human existence. Like, imagine everything that, like, we've had World War I, we've had World War II, we've had all these wars in recent memory. And if you go back even before that, there are wars that trump that, just as far as brutality. Some of the Asian wars, Genghis Khan and all that stuff, they did some pretty harsh stuff. But the scale of what we're talking about here is going to be something that trumps anything we've experienced in history. Unless Yahweh had shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he shortened the days. And I'm just going to pause right here. I didn't mean to get into this, but it's perfect because we're in an election cycle. I like to say selection cycle, but maybe that's just me being cynical. For the sake of the elect, whom he chose. On paper, when we elect a president, what are we doing? We're choosing them. So there's all these theologians that like to talk about how do we define the elect? Who are the elect? The elect are the people that Yahweh chose. So like our politicians, what are they always doing? They're trying to do things to get us to choose them. And so when we think about being the elect, maybe we should stop and think, am I living in a manner that Yahweh would want to choose me? Because if we're not, then we really don't have any business to call ourselves the elect. That's just my 2 cents there. It's not rocket science. Verse 21, and then if anyone says to you, behold, here is the Messiah, or behold, he is there, do not believe him, even if it's on YouTube. For false messiahs and false prophets will arise and will show signs and wonders in order to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But take heed, behold, I have told you everything in advance. And I'm reading all this for a reason. It'll tie in with what we're getting into later. But in those days, after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers that are in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send forth the angels and will gather together his elect from the four winds and from the farthest end of the earth to the farthest end of heaven. Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see these things happening, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Hallelujah. But of that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Take heed, keep on the alert, for you do not know when the appointed time will come. It's like a man away on a journey who, upon leaving his house and putting his slaves in charge, assigning to each one his task, turn that down a little bit, it feels like it's starting to feed back, also commanded the doorkeeper to stay on the alert. Therefore be on the alert, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, in case he would come suddenly and find you asleep. What I say to you, I say to all, be on the alert. And some translations just say watch. So I wanted to read this just because it's got this is the whole thought process here, is how do we endure to the end? And those of us in this Messianic Torah movement, whatever we call it, we like to point to this verse sometimes to say, see, it says, he who endures to the end will be saved. So it's this kind of argument against the once saved, always saved mindset. You know, that you do whatever it takes to get saved, and then once that moment happens, then you're done. But if that's where we stop, verses like this don't make sense. Because enduring till the end, that's something different than just having faith, having belief, these types of concepts that we tie in with like salvation. So we're going to look at this kind of in a macro scale, which I think is kind of, if I was to look at this prophecy for what it is, this is looking at world events, things that are happening in the world. How do we endure through that? That's the macro. But the principles that come into play with that, we can also use in the micro in our own personal lives and our own personal walks, be it individually or with our families, our close friends, etc. So the word for endure there, we're going to really focus in on this hard. It's Strong's G5278, hupomeno, if I said that correctly. And the King James translates it in a few different ways, and they're all pretty basic. Endure, take patiently, tarry behind, abide, to stay in one place, be patient, and to suffer. So to get a flavor of how this word is used, we're going to read in Luke chapter 2. Going the wrong way. Matthew, Mark, Luke, not the other way around. Luke chapter 2, we're going to read verses 41 through 45. Now, the Greek word is here. In our English, you're not going to see the word endure. But I'm going to say the word endure just to kind of show the flavor of how this word can be used. So Luke 2, verse 41. This is when Yahshua is a young boy and they're coming to the feast for Passover. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover. When he became 12, they went up there according to the custom of the feast. And as they were returning, after spending the full number of days, the boy Yahshua endured in Jerusalem. But his parents were unaware of it, but supposed him to be in the caravan, and went a day's journey, and they began looking for him among their relatives and acquaintances. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem looking for him. And so your translations probably all said some variation of stay behind. He stayed behind. Maybe they said remained. It's the same word for endure. And so in this study, we're going to be looking at this idea of like, what does enduring have to do with staying behind or remaining, and how does that work? How do we get from point A to point B and connect those ideas, and how do we live that? How do we endure or stay behind or remain until the end? So we're going to go to Romans 12 next. And we're going to read the whole chapter. And we're going to kind of get into some of these things. We're going to start to kind of connect some of these themes here. And like I said, we're going to take this back into the Older Testament later. We're going to read the whole chapter. Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of Elohim, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to Elohim, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of Elohim is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. For through the grace given to me, Paul, I say to everyone among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as Elohim has allotted to each a measure of faith. For just as we have many members in one body, and all the members do not have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Messiah, and individually members of one another. This is a theme we're going to build on. Hopefully you pick up on this. Since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, each of us is to exercise them accordingly. If prophecy, according to the proportion of his faith. If service, in his serving. Or he who teaches, in his teaching. Or he who exhorts, in his exhortation. He who gives liberality, he who gives with liberality. He who leads with diligence. He who shows mercy with cheerfulness. Let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor, not lagging behind in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the master. Rejoicing in hope, persevering in tribulation. Now that word persevering, that's this word we've been looking at for endure. And we just read in Luke, it can also be translated to stay behind or remain. Devoted to prayer, verse 13. Contributing to the needs of the saints or the holy ones, practicing hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind or proud, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation. Never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of Elohim. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says Yahweh. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him, and if he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And I didn't have to read that whole chapter, but there's so much good stuff there. I just did it anyway, because why not? There's so many good things there. But that word there for persevering in tribulation, like I said, that's the same word for endure. So how do we endure in tribulation? I'm not going to read it, but we see in the book of James, he talks about when you find yourself in various trials and tribulations, rejoice. And that's kind of a hard concept until you realize that, it's a test. Kids that are in school, if you have a test, you study the material, you take the test, hopefully you pass it. If you've got a good teacher that's encouraging, they will give you some type of praise, maybe some type of reward, a good job, keep it up kind of thing, which makes you feel good. And you want to do more of that. You want to please that teacher on some level. Now, if you have a teacher that just doesn't even acknowledge that, there's no positive feedback, that's a different thing. But when we have these tests and tribulations in life, every one of them is an opportunity to overcome and show the Father, hey, Dad, hey, Abba, look what I did, And of course, just like in school, when you pass one test, the next one's not easier, it's harder. Life is like that too. You pass one test and the next one that comes along is harder. But because you passed a one test, you've shown him that you have the capability to do it. And of course, this whole idea has to do with growth, but that's a whole other thing later. So we're going to stick with the 12s, chapter 12s, but we're going to go to Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 12. And we're going to read verses 1 through 7. Hebrews chapter 12, 1 through 7. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. And let us run with endurance, the same word, the race that is set before us. Fixing our eyes on Yahshua, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the stake, or the cross, or the tree, depending on how you want to interpret that, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of Elohim. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So he's setting up this idea with endurance. Look at what Messiah did. And what did he do? It says that he despised the shame. So in our own lives, when we're persecuted, when we have people that come against us, and whether they're lying, whether they break confidence and say something that's embarrassing, all these different things, we're not obligated to just be okay with that, because it's not okay. What happened to Joshua in the flesh was not okay. And I'm grateful that it did, because without that, we wouldn't have the salvation that we have secure for us. But in the flesh, in his position, it was not okay for him to be treated the way he was treated. So yes, he did despise it. He didn't want to be in that situation, but he did it anyway. He endured, and that's our example. Verse 4, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of Yahweh, nor faith when you are reproved by him. For those whom Yahweh loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you endure. Elohim deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? And so we'll just stop there for now. But this idea that, I just want to go back real quick here. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood. So, like, shedding blood is resisting sin. I can't think of anybody I've ever known in my life that's done that. So I think he's comparing us back to Messiah. Messiah did shed blood. We know prophetically from Isaiah 53 and other places that he was going to bear our sin. And so resisting that sin, he prayed to the Father, your will, please let this cup pass from me, but your will, not mine, be done. And he sweated blood. And so he was so resistant to the idea of sin. I don't think in the flesh he wanted to bear that burden, but he did it for our benefit. He endured. None of us have gotten to that point to where we're literally sweating blood because of the sin in our lives. Like, none of us are going through a point to where it's grieving us so badly to have sin on our chalkboard that we're actually so stressed out that we're sweating blood. But yet, that's what he did, and he got through it. So hopefully we're starting to kind of see kind of a pattern here. Let's go to James 1, just a couple pages over. We're going to read the whole chapter, James 1, and I alluded to this earlier, but we're going to flesh it out. James chapter 1. James, or Jacob more accurately in the Hebrew, a bondservant of Yahweh and of the Master Yahshua the Messiah, to the 12 tribes who are dispersed abroad, greetings. Now, I just have to pause real quick right there. I can't help it. It's low-hanging fruit. This was a letter. My understanding of this, scholars call this a homily. Okay, this was something that he wrote that was meant to be copied and passed around kind of as an encouragement. And so when he addresses it to the 12 tribes who are dispersed abroad, if I'm going to send a letter to somebody, I need to know where it's going. I need to know the address. So at the time this was written, they had to have still known where the tribes were at, all 12 of them. And I believe that they did. We've lost that over time. But at the time he did this, yes, they were mingling with the nations. Yes, there was a lot of dispersion there. But I still think that they had a general idea of where they were geographically. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Okay, it's this whole thing here. Let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. But this perfect here, it does mean complete. It doesn't mean like, oh, I'm perfect and flawless, I never make mistakes, that kind of thing. It just means complete, having everything you need in your life. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of Elohim, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But he must ask in faith without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For that man ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the master, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. But the brother of humble circumstances is to glory in his high position, and the rich man is to glory in his humiliation, because like flowering grass he will pass away. For the sun rises with a scorching wind and withers the grass, and its flower falls off, and the beauty of its appearance is destroyed. So too the rich man in the midst of his pursuits will fade away. Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the master has promised to those who love him. Now, this kind of sets up a thing here, because we read earlier about running a race. And Paul talks about it in one of his letters. And I'm just going to set up a theme here to use as a picture. Paul talks in one of his letters about the idea of boxing at the air, shadow boxing, basically. And so if you are, like, if I was in a fight, I don't know how to fight. I've never taken lessons. I would probably box at air. I would probably miss the bad guy with my fearsome right hook. Maybe I would slip and fall. Who knows? I would like to think not, but knowing me, that would probably happen. Okay? But the reason for that is because I don't spend any time preparing to fight people with hand-to-hand combat. Okay? So I just want to set this up. This idea of there's something that you're preparing for. If we're running a race, you don't just show up at a marathon. We've got some people here who ran a marathon recently, and you don't just show up unprepared for that. If you know you're going to run a marathon, you make sure your diet's right. You exercise. You get your cardio in. You actually practice. You run and run and run and run and run, and then that way you have a better shot of actually finishing the race. And so same thing with like boxing. You don't just show up at a boxing match against Mike Tyson and expect to win. You have to actually devote yourself to practicing and learning and getting better, all the physical attributes, but also the mental attributes. And so when he's talking about here in verse 12, blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the master has promised to those who love him. This is kind of like language of you've accomplished this thing and now you're being rewarded. And so to put it in, I hate to even bring it up, but I'll just do it cursorily here. The Olympics are going on right now. And they have this whole thing where if you win, if you're first, second, third, or whatever, of course, you can be a man and destroy a woman in the boxing ring, to use the boxing analogy, and still get the gold medal, which is absolutely heinous, but that's where we're at. But the idea is that you get a reward. And when we look at the language, this is a whole other study. But when you look at when we look at the rewards at the end of our life, like at the end of our age with our judgment, there's two basic things. There's two basic judgments that happen. There's judgment A, which is this person going to have eternal life? Okay, like that's, to me, that's the bare minimum. They're going to have eternal life. They're good. The second level, and I always get the Greek words mixed up, but the second level of judgment has to do with this type of thing, like what is your reward? Okay, so you got eternal life. You're going to live forever in the kingdom, but where are you in the kingdom? Are you a lowly servant? Are you a friend of the groom? Are you the bride? There's different things like this at play, and our actions and our faith go into that. And so when I look at a verse like this, I'm thinking like he's looking at our lives and he's looking how we overcame trials and tribulations, and he's assessing what type of reward he's going to give us. And so just kind of this idea of pushing through to the end and achieving something. Verse 13, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by Elohim, for Elohim cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. But when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. In the exercise of his will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, so that we would be a kind of firstfruits among his creatures. This you know, my beloved brethren, that everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of Elohim. Therefore, putting aside all filthiness and all that remains of wickedness, in humility receive the word implanted, which is able to save your souls. But prove yourselves doers of the word, not merely hearers who delude themselves. This would be like, to go back to the whole boxing analogy, this would be like watching hours and hours and hours and hours of YouTube videos about how to box, but never once setting foot in the ring, never sparring, never actually doing it, and expecting to show up and actually win a match. It's not going to happen. So if we're hearers of the word, if we know things about the word, we have knowledge about what the Bible says, that's not equivalent to living it. It's not equivalent to doing it. We actually have to get our hands dirty and do this thing. See, where were we here? Verse 23, for if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he was. But the one who looks intently at the perfect law, the law of liberty and abides by it, not having become a forgetful hearer, but an effectual doer, this man will be blessed in what he does. If anyone thinks himself to be religious and yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is worthless. Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of Elohim and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world. And so I want to just go back here real quick. One who looks intently, verse 25, at the perfect law, the law of liberty. Now, in the mainstream, they will say, oh, that's the law of Christ. That's this, love your neighbor as yourself, love God, and that's as far as we go. There's really no definition. There's no concrete way to look at that. So love is just this kind of sliding scale, kind of like morality. Everybody kind of defines what it means to them. And then that's what the law of liberty is. But if we go to the Psalms, like Psalm 19, Psalm 119, all of these things that David wrote about the law, I think he kind of associated the Torah with liberty. And the reason is, I think it's really easy. If you can read things in black and white and you know exactly what's right and wrong, it takes that sliding scale of morality out of it. And so, you have a much clearer path. You don't have to wonder all the time, like, am I doing what's right? Am I doing what's wrong? We do have those situations that pop up because the Torah doesn't address every single possible thing that we can or cannot do. That's where we have to have some common sense or some sound logic, but it does address a lot of it, at least conceptually. So having that intently, it's this idea of like you're just focused. Like I have to obtain this, and you're obsessed with it almost. And so it's this idea of like almost like a goal. So we'll do one more scripture in the New Testament, and then we'll go to the Old Testament. We're going to go over to 1 Peter, a couple pages over. And we're going to read chapter 2, again, the whole chapter. Therefore, putting aside all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and slander, like newborn babies, long for the pure milk of the word, so that by it you may grow in respect to salvation, if you have tasted the kindness of the Master. Now remember, we read earlier in Luke about this idea of he who endures to the end will be saved. So it's a process. Salvation is a process. Here, he talks about taking this milk that you may grow in respect to salvation. So you're growing into salvation. It's not just a once and done thing like, oh, I'm saved, I can check it off, and nothing salvific ever happens in my life going forward. It's an ongoing process. Verse 4, and coming to him as to living stone, which has been rejected by men, but is choice and precious in the sight of Elohim. You also, as living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to Elohim through Yahshua the Messiah. For this is contained in Scripture. Behold, I lay in Zion a choice stone, a precious cornerstone, and he who believes in him will not be disappointed. This precious value, then, is for you who believe, but for those who disbelieve, the stone which the builders rejected, this became the very cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. For they stumble because they are disobedient to the word, and to this doom they were also appointed. Which makes sense, because we're told that the word is a lamp to our feet, a light unto our path. We're told not to go to the left or to the right. And if somebody's not being obedient to that word, they are going to stumble. Just logically. Verse 9, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for Yahweh's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. For you were once not a people, but now you are the people of Yahweh. You have not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Beloved, I urge you as strangers and aliens to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles or the nations, so that in the thing which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify Elohim in the day of visitation. I just want to pause just real quick right here. So keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that the thing which they slander you as evildoers, they do it because of your good deeds. So basically, this is the idea that if people are going to spread rumors, if people are going to slander us, maybe even bring legal action against us, things like this, let it be because they're coming after our righteousness. Let it be because, just like with the disciples dealing with the Pharisees and Sadducees, doing absolutely nothing wrong but preaching the good news of the kingdom and being brought in and being scourged and persecuted. The only reason they were persecuted was because they were doing this. They were doing good deeds. They were spreading the good news. It wasn't anything that they actually earned under the law, either the Torah or the law of the land. Submit yourselves, verse 13, for the master's sake, to every human institution, whether to a king as to one in authority, or to governors as sent to him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of Elohim, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Act as free men, and do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondservants of Elohim. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear Elohim, honor the king. Servants, be submissive to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are unreasonable. For this finds favor, if for the sake of conscience towards Elohim a person bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if, when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure, this finds favor with Elohim. And I'm going to break that down in a minute, but we're going to keep going here. For you have been called for this purpose, since Messiah also suffered for you, leaving you an example for how to follow in his steps. We read about that earlier. Who committed no sin, nor was any deceit found in his mouth. And while being reviled, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats, but he kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. And he himself bore our sins in his body on the stake or the cross, so that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. For by his wounds you were healed. For you were continually straying like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of our souls. So let's back up just real quick here. And some of this language here, I'm just going to read verse 20. For what credit is there if, when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure, this finds favor with Elohim. Now, when I read this, I couldn't help but go back to Job. If we remember Job's setup, Job was a righteous man. It says it several times. And the way he speaks, he knows he's righteous. He's aware of it. And it's okay to be righteous. It's okay to be holy. It's okay to be good. It's okay to be all these things. And so, but when the persecution came upon him and everything was taken away, his children, his health, his wealth, all these things, everything except for his actual life and his wife, Yahweh was merciful enough not to take away his wife, but everything was taken from him. And his friends show up and they come to the logical conclusion, you're being punished by God because you sinned. You really did something here to bring this on. This is bad, Job. You've been hiding stuff from us. You've been acting all righteous and you've been doing all this, but behind the scenes, you must be doing something really crazy, is basically what they were accusing him of. And Job repeatedly said, no. I haven't sinned like that. I'm righteous. I teach righteousness to the youth, and this is not what's happening. And it was to the point to where, in New Testament terms, we would say that Job wanted to Matthew 18 Yahweh himself. Of course, Matthew 18 is where if somebody offends you, you go to them with the offense. And, if they reject that, then you bring another witness. And if they reject that, then you bring it before the assembly. So Job had a legal grievance against Yahweh. He could not see a legal, logical reason for Yahweh to be punishing him the way he was. And, of course, we get to the end of Job, and Job persevered. He endured. He got through it. And, of course, he was given a double portion of everything that he lost at the end. And so, with the exception of the kids, he didn't get a double portion of kids. He just had the same number. But in any case, so he got to the end, and if we look at this, verse 20, when you sin, you're harshly treated. Okay, that was the conclusion of his friends. Job sinned, therefore he is being harshly treated. When you do what is right and you suffer for it, you patiently endure it, that finds favor with Elohim. That's exactly what Job did. Job suffered through his persecution. He suffered through the trial, and Job couldn't say, well, I really messed up. This is my fault. I did this. Because when I make a mistake and consequences happen, Yes, it's no fun to go through those consequences, but I take some kind of solace or some kind of relief in knowing this is a consequence of my actions. Okay, so if I want to avoid these things from happening in the future, I can change my actions and the negative consequences won't happen. But something like this, where you did absolutely nothing wrong and the bad stuff is happening anyway, that's much harder to get through because then you have nothing internal. There's nothing you can control. There's nothing you can change. The only thing you can do, and Job never did it, because it says specifically that with all this, he did not curse Elohim with his lips. And that's always struck me, because did Job curse Elohim in his thoughts? Did he have questions? We talked about this last year. I don't know if anybody remembers, but we did a teaching called Wrestling with God last year about this whole idea of, as Israelites, as followers of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we wrestle. We wrestle with Elohim. And it's not always a clean, tidy relationship. It gets messy sometimes. We're part of a family. He's our father. And my children, our relationship as father and child, there are times when I wrong them. There are times when I let them down. And we try to encourage them to communicate that openly to us, not in a rebellious or subversive way, but just in an honest way. Because, I've come to see this really strongly in the past couple of years. The more we interact with each other, if we're honest and open and transparent like we should be, we're going to offend each other. It's just going to happen. But what do we do on the back end of that? Do we talk to each other through that? Do we communicate? Do we reconcile on the back end? Is there forgiveness? That should be the goal. And that's part of the enduring. That's part of the getting through and winning the race. Because if we just trip up and stumble every time that there's a little speed bump or something, we're never going to get close to the finish line. But with Job, he's a prime example of what this looks like. He just kept right on going. And at the end of the book, he never knew why. We know why as the readers. But when you read that book, it never says, and then somebody came and told Job, oh, by the way, this happened because Satan, went to heaven and he was talking to Yahweh and there was this whole challenge. And Job had no knowledge of that as far as we know. And Yahweh never told him. Yahweh was basically like, look, I can do what I need to do. You're involved in this, but it's not really about you, Job, and Job just kind of had to accept that. So as part of our enduring, we get to places like that where we just kind of have to accept things as they are, even if they're really bad. And there may not be a logical explanation. There may not be a sin that we can point to and say, well, I messed up and this is the consequence. That doesn't always happen. So in these New Testament scriptures, we've kind of seen this idea of patience, and things happen to us and we somehow just get through it, like connecting it back to Luke 2, Joshua stayed behind, okay? And so like if we think about the enduring, staying behind, the whole group went one way and they didn't do it maliciously, but just in the physical, they were going away from where his father was centered. They were going away from the temple. And he wanted to be there about his father's business. He wanted to be there with his father. So he remained, he endured, he stayed behind. And so he didn't go with the group. But that's kind of a pattern that we're going to see here, is this idea of you have an option to go someplace and you don't as part of your walk. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. It is kind of abstract, but it'll get more concrete as we get into the Hebrew here. We're going to go back to Genesis 18, and we're going to start there in a minute. But in the Hebrew, there are a couple words we're going to look at here that get translated as endure in the English. The first one is Strong's H5975. It's the word amad. And the King James translates it a few different ways. Stood, which is the past tense of stand. Stand, which is the present tense of stand, if you didn't know. To raise up. To set, like I set something on the table. To stay. Still, like be still. Appointed, standing, endure. Remain, present, continue, withstand, wait, and establish. So all of these words that get translated different ways in English, they all come from the same Hebrew word, and at its base, it has to do with standing, okay? And so we're going to take a look at some scriptures here that talk about this word, and then we're going to get into the other word for endure, and we're going to kind of see where this takes us. And by the time this is over, I'm going to hope that we'll come back full circle in a way that kind of reinforces everything. So first mention of this word is appropriately Genesis 18. We're going to read verses 1 through 22. And remember all the words I just said there, and this word means to stand or stood, some variation of that. So Genesis 18, 1 through 22, this is the birth of Isaac being promised. Now Yahweh appeared to him, Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. And he said, My master, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, So do as you have said. Now, I have to just say something that I just now thought of. I was talking with my wife earlier today with Shauna about the idea that when like John the Baptist, right? There's a prophecy in Isaiah about this person coming who's going to prepare the way for Yahweh. And in the New Testament, it's very clear that that was John the Baptist or John the Immerser's mission. He was there to prepare the way. Well, in the New Testament, it makes it clear who he's paving the way for. He's paving the way for the Messiah, for Yahshua. And so if John the Baptist is the fulfillment of that prophecy, that someone will be sent to prepare the way for Yahweh, that puts an equal sign between Yahweh, as mentioned in Isaiah, and Yahshua in the New Testament. And so as we read this, I can't help but see this. In the New Testament Gospels, we see the Last Supper. He demands to wash the feet of his servants. And if Yahweh is Yahshua, here we have Abraham all those centuries ago washing his feet. And so that's kind of a circular loop kind of thing. Like the servant is washing the master's feet here in Genesis, and then later on we see the master washing the servant's feet. And I've never seen that before until now. So hallelujah, I'm gonna have to chew on that one. Okay, so verse 4, please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree, and I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, So do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, Quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. Abraham also ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servants, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. That's this word, amad, that gets translated as endure. So if I just say he was enduring by them under the tree as they ate, in our English, that doesn't really make any sense. Like, what's he enduring? Like, is there a problem? Like, is he under stress? But he's literally standing. Then they said to him, Where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, There in the tent, as if he didn't already know. He said, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, After I've become old, shall I have pleasure, my master being also old? And Yahweh said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I indeed bear a child when I'm so old? Is anything too difficult for Yahweh? At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah denied it, however, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, No, but you did laugh. Then the men rose up from there and looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. How far was I going to go there? 22? Okay, yeah, let's keep going. Yahweh said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of Yahweh by doing righteousness and justice, so that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. And Yahweh said, The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing, amad, enduring, if you will, before Yahweh. So the first mentioned thing here, to me, is really prescient because in my mind, in my way of thinking, so much of the scriptures, so much of the good news goes back to Abraham. And to have this word for endure go back to Abraham literally standing before Yahweh, and the presence of his maker, it boggles the mind. Next mention here is the next chapter over, Genesis 19. We're just going to read a couple verses here, 19 verses 27 through 29. Genesis 19, 27 through 29. Abraham arose early in the morning, and he went to the place where he had stood before Yahweh. So we just read where that was. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. Thus it came about when Elohim destroyed the cities of the valley that Elohim remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. Now, we know that the scriptures call Abraham a friend of Elohim, a friend of Yahweh. And to have that honor, to have the maker of all things call you his friend, I can't even imagine what that's like, but it's a goal I aspire to. But he was standing, he was enduring with Yahweh. And when the two messengers went over to Sodom, he was still standing with Yahweh. And then as he watches the destruction, he wakes up the next morning and he sees that Yahweh's word had come to pass. He sees what happened. He goes back to the place where he was standing before Yahweh. And so to me, that's key. It's this whole idea of we want to be where Yahweh is. And last week we talked about the idea of atonement, this idea of we have to have some barrier between us and Yahweh's power, his holiness, all these attributes of his that are just too much for us to bear. But his very nature wants to be with us. And so, Abraham, I think, kind of has that heart where he just kind of wants to be where Yahweh was. And so he's associating that closeness with where he was physically standing with Yahweh. So let's go over to the next book, Exodus chapter 8. This is another instance of this word amad for stand. And remember, this is called keep calm and endure till the end, not necessarily keep calm and stand until the end. Although as we go through this, we'll see that there is something very relevant to the idea of standing. Exodus chapter 8, we're going to read verses 16 through 19. Exodus chapter 8, 16 through 19. Once I get there. These are the plagues of Egypt. Exodus chapter 8, 16 through 19. Then Yahweh said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth, that it may become gnats throughout all the land of Egypt. They did so, and Aaron stretched out his hand with the staff and struck the dust of the earth, and there were gnats on man and beast. All the dust of the earth became gnats through all the land of Egypt. The magicians tried with their secret arts to bring forth gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on man and beast. Then the magicians said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of Elohim. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them as Yahweh had said. So how far I wanted to go there? Yeah, okay. Wait, do I want to go? I think I typed in the wrong verse here. Okay, yeah, we're going to go to the next chapter then. Okay, so yeah, I'm sorry. It just doesn't have the word endure in it, but I'm connecting it to the next verse. I forgot to make that note. So let's go right over to Exodus 9. Now, physically, Moses is standing before Pharaoh when all this is happening. If you've seen the movie The Ten Commandments, you know that every time this happens, he goes and he stands before Yul Brynner, and Yul Brynner's very, this isn't happening, Moses. Go away, Charlton Heston. You're getting paid more than me, and it's not fair. All this kind of stuff, because Yul Brynner was actually like that in real life, apparently. So anyway, let's go to the next chapter. We're going to go a couple plagues over, and we're going to read Exodus 9, 8 through 17. This starts with the boils. Then Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, "Take for yourselves handfuls of soot from a kiln, and let Moses throw it toward the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over all the land of Egypt, and will become boils breaking out with sores on man and beast through all the land of Egypt." So they took soot from a kiln and stood, it's the same word, amad, for endure. They stood before Pharaoh, and Moses threw it toward the sky, and it became boils breaking out with sores on man and beast. The magicians could not stand, same word, before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians as well as on all the Egyptians. And Yahweh hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not listen to them, just as Yahweh had spoken to Moses. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say to him, 'Thus says Yahweh, the Elohim of the Hebrews, let my people go that they may serve me. For this time I will send all my plagues on you and your servants and your people, so that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. For if by now I had put forth my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, you would have been cut off from the earth. But indeed, for this reason I have allowed you to remain, in order to show you my power, in order to proclaim my name through all the earth. Still you exalt yourself against my people by not letting go.'" And so this interaction with Pharaoh here, we don't see this word for stand in all of this. A few times we did here, but thematically we see this kind of idea here. Verse 16, "By this reason I have allowed you to remain." Remember, if we go back to the New Testament in Luke, Yahshua remained, he stayed behind. "In order to show you my power and in order to proclaim my name through all the earth. And still you exalt yourself against my people by not letting them go." Sometimes this word gets, and we didn't see it here, but occasionally related words to this word for stand do have a way of talking about like pride or exaltation. So thematically it's connected. But if we look at that, Moses is going in and he's standing before Pharaoh, and it gets to the point to where the magicians cannot stand before Moses. And so if we put that endure, Moses is enduring before Pharaoh, but the magicians get to the point to where they cannot endure before Moses. Okay? They can't stand. So if we think about, if we go back to the boxing analogy earlier, it's like the whole point of boxing is to have like a last man standing. If you go into a boxing match and the bell rings at the end of the round or even before, and you're not standing, you're not going to be the winner of that match, guaranteed. And so if you can't stand all the way through the fight, you have no shot of winning. So standing, enduring, these things are thematically connected to this idea of basically remaining upright and on your feet all the way through the trial, all the way through to the end. Exodus chapter 18, we'll read that next, and we're going to read the whole chapter this time. Exodus chapter 18. This is Jethro. "Now Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that Elohim had done for Moses and for Israel his people, how Yahweh had brought Israel out of Egypt. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Moses' wife Zipporah after he had sent her away, and her 2 sons, of whom one was named Gershom, for Moses said, 'I have been a sojourner in a strange land.' The other was named Eleazar, for he said, 'The Elohim of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh.' Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was camped at the mount of Elohim. He sent word to Moses, 'I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her.' Then Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and he bowed down and kissed him, and they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law all that Yahweh had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had befallen them on the journey. What do we endure? We endure hardships, right? And how Yahweh had delivered them. Deliverance, salvation, thematically connected. He who endures to the end will be saved. Jethro rejoiced over all the goodness which Yahweh had done to Israel in delivering them from the hand of the Egyptians. So Jethro said, 'Blessed be Yahweh who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people.' Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for Elohim, And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law before Elohim. It came about the next day that Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood about Moses from the morning until the evening. That word stood is this word amad, stand, endure. Now when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you're doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge and all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" So this word literally means stand. Like so far we've seen it literally mean stand, but yet it also gets translated as endure. Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of Elohim. When they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor and make known the statutes of Elohim and his laws." Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing that you are doing is not good. You will surely wear out, both yourself and these people who are with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone." I just want to pause real quick here. This idea of a burden, like if I imagine myself with a rucksack that's, say, got, 140 pounds in it, and I'm supposed to stand upright, maybe I can do it. I'm a weakling, but maybe I could do it. It'll be difficult. Am I going to be able to go on a hike with that? Absolutely not. I wish I could, but it's not going to happen. So having a burden makes it difficult to stand. And so how do we endure until the end? How do we have salvation at the end if we can't stand with burdens? We're not going to read it today, but we're told that the law of Messiah is bearing each other's burdens. And this is kind of a key theme of what we're going to look at here. And this is exactly what Jethro was trying to get into Moses' head here. "Listen to me," verse 19. "I will give you counsel, and Elohim will be with you. You be the people's representative before Elohim, and you bring the disputes to Elohim. Then teach them the statutes and the laws, and make known to them the way in which they are to walk, and the work they are to do. Furthermore, you shall select out of the people able men who fear Elohim, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. Let them judge the people at all times, and let it be that every major dispute they will bring to you, but every minor dispute they themselves will judge. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this thing, and Elohim so commands you, then you will be able to endure," same word, "and all these people also will go to their place in peace." So Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. They judged the people at all times. The difficult dispute they would bring to Moses, but every minor dispute they themselves would judge. Then Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went his way into his own land. So Moses is trying to administer judgment on every single case brought before him. We know that at the time they left Egypt, there were approximately 600,000 men, in addition to the women and children. It's estimated women and children and men, it would have been around 2 million people. And one man is going to judge all of their issues. And so his father-in-law was concerned about that burden crushing Moses. And so he gave advice on what to do. Spread the load. Teach people the Torah. Have those people go out and teach all the people the Torah. And if all the people know the law and are applying equal weights and measures in their interpretation of it and their administration of it, you will have fewer disputes because all this stuff is going to get worked out just naturally. The stuff that can't get worked out through just doing the Torah, which the Torah doesn't cover everything, so it comes up and it happens, there's gray areas, then that will come to the judges that you assign. And he was supposed to choose able people. Like if he would have chose people that couldn't carry the burden, it wouldn't have benefited him. He had to choose people who were competent and strong enough and worthy enough on some level to bear that burden with him. And by doing so, that took a lot of the pressure off of Moses and allowed him to endure. Because not only does he have to deal with the people, he's actually it had to be stressful. I mean, we talk about, wanting to be in Yahweh's presence. But if we think about just the power differential between us and him, like people get terrified when they see angels. In the book of Daniel, the angels had to say, "Fear not, Daniel." You know, something about these spiritual beings that come into our presence can be terrifying. And Moses is expected to be the one that interfaces directly with the Most High. And so this takes a lot of pressure off of him and helps him stand, helps him endure. He could not do it alone, and Jethro knew that. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the next word in Hebrew for endure. This is Strong's H3557, and it's the word cool, like Kool-Aid. King James translates it in the following manner. This is where things get interesting for me. Contain, feed, sustain, abide, nourish, hold, receive, victual, which is another word for food, bear, like to carry, and comprehended. And when we think about comprehended, why would comprehended have to do anything with a word that means contain? And if you think about your head as a container, if something's not in your head, it's because you don't comprehend it. Like reading comprehension is what actually gets into your head and stays there. What did you retain when you read the book? So comprehension has to do with holding information. That's why it's connected with this word. So with that in mind, let's take a look at this word for contain, knowing that this word also has to do with enduring. Now, the King James, you notice it didn't say endure when I just read off that list of King James words. In the New American Standard that I read from, it does say endure, because thematically it's related. But we're going to go to Genesis 45, and we're going to read verses 1 through 11. This is Joseph and his brothers. Genesis 45, 1 through 11. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried, "Have everyone go out from me." So there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard of it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come closer to me." And they came closer. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for Elohim sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. Elohim sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth, and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but Elohim, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and master of all his household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, Elohim has made me master of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. There I will also provide for you, for there are still 5 years of famine to come, and you and your household and all that you have would be impoverished.'" So this famine's been going on in the land, and Joseph wants his father to bring his family down so that they don't have to go through the famine anymore. There's plenty of food in Egypt thanks to what Joseph did. Now, this word for provide in verse 11, "There I will provide for you," that's this word cool, contain. Therefore I will contain for you. Therefore I will hold for you. It doesn't really make sense if we say it that way. But if we think about this whole thing, he's able to do this because he was stockpiling grain in containers for the 7 years of plenty. So you get provision because you're saving, because you're holding on to things, you're keeping things. And so he's able to provide because of that. But then also thematically, if you look at it, I feel like I'm getting some echo again here. The idea of containing is when you give somebody, like if I'm providing something to you, you have to have some way to contain it. Like I can't just give somebody, a truckload of grain and they don't have a place to store it. So in order to do something like this, when we deal with provision, you have to have some way to prepare the provision. You have to have some way to receive the provision, and it all informs some type of containment. It's kind of abstract, but that's kind of how Hebrew works. So the next instance, we're going to go to 1 Kings. We're going to skip several books here and go right into 1 Kings. We're going to read chapter 4 and verse 7. 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 7. And remember, if we go back to this idea in the New Testament, enduring, being patient, remaining, We go back to what we read earlier in the Old Testament about standing, being still, like not moving, enduring. These are all related concepts. And now we're getting into the idea of holding or containing. So 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 7, this is dealing with Solomon. Solomon had 12 deputies over all Israel who provided, this is that word cool, provided for the king and his household. Each man had to provide for a month in the year. And then he goes and names them all and tells where they were from. So these 12 deputies are collecting goods from the people and bringing it to Solomon, and they're each taking a month out of the year to do it. So they're taking provisions from the people and they're transferring that. And this word for provide is this word for container or hold, okay? And we're going to see later on that this word can also mean sustain or sustenance. So let's go right over, we're going to stay in the same book, 1 Kings 17. 1 Kings 17, we're going to read verses 1 through 16. This is Elijah. 1 Kings 17, 1 through 16. Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, "As Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, lives, before whom I stand," surely, that's not the word we're looking at, but it's there. "Surely there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except for by my word." The word of Yahweh came to him, saying, "Go away from here and turn eastward, and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. It shall be that you will drink of the brook, and I've commanded the ravens to provide for you there." That's this word cool, contain, hold. So what does crows or ravens bringing food have to do with containing? What does that have to do with enduring? Well, let's keep going though. So he went and did according to the word of Yahweh, for he went and lived by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he would drink from the brook. It happened after a while that the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. Then the word of Yahweh came to him, saying, "Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you." The same word, hold, contain, nourish, endure. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks, and he called to her, and he said, "Please get me a little water in a jar that I may drink." As she was going to get it, he called to her and said, "Please bring me a piece of bread in your hand." But he said, "As Yahweh your Elohim lives, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil in the jar. And behold, I am gathering a few sticks that I may go and prepare for me and my son, that we may eat it and die." Then Elijah said to her, "Do not fear. Go, do as you have said, but make me a little bread cake from it first and bring it out to me, and afterward you may make one for yourself and for your son. For thus says Yahweh Elohim of Israel, the bowl of flour shall not be exhausted, nor shall the jar of oil be empty until the day that Yahweh sends rain on the face of the earth." Could we say that this jar is going to endure till the end? This jar is waiting for something. If this jar runs out, it's all over for this widow. But he's keeping this jar full. It's literally enduring till the end of this drought. Let's see, where were we here? Okay, verse 15. So she went and did according to the word of Elijah. She and he and her household ate for many days. The bowl of flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar of oil become empty, according to the word of Yahweh, which he spoke through Elijah. So Elijah is being provided for by this word that means contain. The ravens are bringing him food, and the widow is providing for him. And ultimately, we know that in her case, she's able to provide for Elijah because Yahweh is providing for her. So we have this idea, if we just think if we go back to our boxing analogy, if a fighter is in a fight, he's in a ring, he's got the ropes around him, and we see Muhammad Ali used to do this. I'm sort of into boxing a little bit now. I find it interesting. I can't do it, but I find it interesting. And fighters will sometimes lean on the ropes for a while. If you get exhausted, you're getting pummeled, and you just need a little bit to recover, you can lean on the ropes, maybe take some hits to the gut or something, just kind of protect yourself, get your wind back, and then kind of get back in the fight. So if we look at this whole enduring till the end thing, you need to be prepared before you start the battle. Before you start the trial, you need to be ready, you need to be prepared. So if we look at like life in general, you know, uh, you got to stay ready so you don't have to get ready, I've heard someone say, and that's stuck in my head over the years. But it's this idea that you don't want to be caught in the moment unprepared, because when that time happens, you can't get prepared. You know, if you're talking about stuff coming on the world, war coming, which is a possibility the way the world is happening, you know, if you are not hardening yourself against an EMP attack, you don't wait until the EMP attack happens and your cell phone's fried and your microwave's fried and everything else is fried, and then say, you know what, I should really get ready for an EMP. It doesn't make any sense at that point. It's too late. You should have done the work to prepare ahead of time. And it's like that with anything in life. And in the end times, if we kind of have an idea of what's coming, we can prepare for that as well. But either way, if we're not prepared when it happens, when the trial comes, we're going to have significantly more difficult time enduring through it. Now we see this idea here that Elijah's being provided. He's having a hard time enduring. Elijah's having a tough time here. And so Yahweh knows that. Yahweh kind of gives him some ropes he can lean on so he doesn't fall over. He sends the ravens to feed him. He sends him to this widow. And in both cases, it's Yahweh himself doing the providing. Okay? He's providing through the ravens. He's providing through the widow. But going back to this idea of holding and standing, I also think of it like a tank. Okay? If a tank, like say a swimming pool, you've got a big swimming pool. We've probably all seen videos, reels on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, shorts, where, you know, this big gigantic swimming pool above ground, somebody hits it wrong and it just kind of collapses and thousands of gallons of water just fall out and the cat washes away off into the neighbor's yard or something, you know. The pool could not contain the water that was in it, so the pool could not stand. So that's another element to this with me connecting these ideas of standing and holding and these kinds of ideas, having to do with endure. If you're being filled with something and you cannot contain it, you cannot hold it, you cannot endure. You will collapse, just like a tank will that's overfilled and not structurally strong enough. So let's go to, we just did 17 there. Let's go to Psalm 55. We're going to read the whole thing, because David's going to talk about some dark stuff in here. He's going to talk about some stuff that happens. Psalm 55. David had some trials, didn't he? Some of it was his own making. Give ear to my prayer, O Elohim, Psalm 55, and do not hide yourself from my supplication. Give heed to me and answer me. I am restless in my complaint and am surely distracted. He's complaining against Yahweh. Because of the voice of the enemy, because of the pressure of the wicked, for they bring down trouble upon me, and in anger they bear a grudge against me. Everything he's just said here is like external pressure on him. It's a burden. And he's complaining that he's having difficulty bearing it. He's having difficulty standing. He's having difficulty enduring. My heart is in anguish within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me. I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Behold, I would wander far away. I would lodge in the wilderness. Selah. I would hasten to my place of refuge from the stormy wind and tempest. Has anyone just said, you know, I want to go find an island somewhere and just get out of this and just go live by myself and not have any crazy neighbors or political issues or, just all the stuff we deal with, my wife and I talk about that sometimes. Can we just go somewhere? I think David's kind of feeling that here. Verse 9, confuse, O Yahweh, divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go around her upon her walls, and iniquity and mischief are in her midst. Destruction is in her midst. Oppression and deceit do not depart from her streets. For it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it. Nor is it one who hates me who has exalted himself against me, then I could hide myself from him. But it is you, a man my equal, my companion and my familiar friend, we who had sweet fellowship together, walking in the house of Elohim in the throng. Let death come deceitfully upon them. Let them go down alive to Sheol, for evil is in their dwelling place in their midst. Verse 16, as for me, I shall call upon Elohim, and Yahweh will save me. He who endures to the end will be saved. Evening and morning and at noon I will complain and murmur, and he will hear my voice. It's okay to complain to Yahweh about how hard life is. It's not something that we should be ashamed with, acknowledging that life is difficult, and if we don't have enough trust in our Father to be able to communicate that to him, that says something about our relationship with him, and it's something that we should work on. He will redeem my soul in peace from the battle which is against me, for they were many who strive with me. Elohim will hear and answer them, even the one who sits enthroned from of old, with whom there is no change, and who do not fear Elohim. He has put forth his hands against those who were at peace with him. He has violated his covenant. He's not talking about Yahweh violating this covenant. He's talking about whoever this person is he's talking about. His speech was smoother than butter, but his heart was war. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. Verse 22, cast your burden upon Yahweh, and he will sustain you. That word sustain is cool, hold, contain. He will contain you. Like, do you ever feel like you're out of control? When we talk about I'm just out of control, it's kind of a way of saying I don't have a container. I'm falling out of my container. I have nothing to hold me steady. He will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. Told that to Job, right? But you, O Elohim, will bring them down to the pit of destruction. Men of bloodshed and deceit will not live out half their days, but I will trust in you. So we're starting to get into this idea, and I'll just go ahead and talk about how I visualize this. If I am having difficulty enduring, if I'm having difficulty standing, because either A, whatever's going on inside of me, I'm not strong enough to endure. I'm falling apart inside, I'm out of control, whatever it is, and I'm having difficulty standing and enduring that. I need someone to help me endure that. I need Moses at the battle of the Amalekites. He's got his staff up, and as long as his staff is up in the air, they're winning the battle. But he's starting to sag. He's starting to deflate. He's starting to crumble. He's not able to stand. So Hur and Aaron come along, and they stand. They hold his staff up in the air, and the battle's won. So Moses had to lean on other people to help him stand, to help him endure. Jethro saw this when he gave the counsel to Moses, choose 70 elders and make them judges to take this pressure off of you. Otherwise, you will crumble. You will fail. You will not be able to endure this. You won't be able to stand. And so I envision it like I need to be contained. I'm falling over. And people in my tribe, people in my community gather around me. We do like a huddle or something. And as long as you guys are able to stand and you're not falling over, guess what? Neither am I. But that only works if you guys are prepared too. If you guys are all falling apart and you guys come to help me and sustain me, well, we're all just going to fall over in a heap. It's going to be a dog pile. And so community, when we talk about enduring till the end, I think community is required. Tribe is required. I talk a lot about this idea of finding your twos and threes. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And so having people in your life who can hold you up when you're falling, who can come alongside you, take your hand and kind of lead you. And then when their time comes and they're having trouble staying contained, they're losing control, guess what? You're in a spot where you can hold them up. And collectively, we all endure to the end. Jeremiah 10:10, we're going to look at this idea of containing again just real quick. We're not going to read about the Christmas tree here. We could, though. Jeremiah 10:10. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. If I can get there. Isaiah 10:10. Yahweh is the true Elohim. He is the living Elohim and the everlasting King. And at his wrath, the earth quakes, and the nations cannot endure his indignation. This is where I said the King James doesn't use the word endure for this word cool, but my New American Standard does. The nations cannot hold, they cannot contain his indignation. So imagine that he's filling the nations up with his wrath, with his indignation, and they're not strong enough to hold it in. They're going to explode, they're going to collapse, they're going to fail. Now, Yahweh's people hopefully don't have to contain his wrath or his indignation because we haven't done anything to merit it, even though on some level we have, but we don't want it to be on the same level as these nations who spurn his kingdom. Malachi 3, we're getting close to the end here. Malachi 3, and I could have gone to all the happy, positive, Joel Osteen type scriptures, everything's going to be great, guys, and that kind of thing, but life is not that easy. Life is complicated. Life has a lot of gray areas. It's not all peachy. Malachi 3, we're going to read verses 1 through 7. Behold, I'm going to send my messenger, and he will clear the way before me, and the master whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. And the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says Yahweh of hosts. But who can endure, stand, or contain, actually, in this case, cool, who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand? Now, this actually is the word we talked about earlier, this word amad, this first word that literally means stand. So who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap. He will sit as a smelter and a purifier of silver. He will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver, so that they may present to Yahweh offerings in righteousness. Then the offering of Judah and of Jerusalem will be pleasing to Yahweh, as in the days of old and as in former days. Then I will draw you near for judgment, and I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers and against the adulterers and against those who swear falsely, against those who oppress the wage earner in his wages, the widow and the orphan, and those who turn aside the stranger and do not fear me, says Yahweh of hosts. For I, Yahweh, do not change. Therefore you, O sons of Jacob, are not consumed. From the days of your fathers you have turned aside from my statutes and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says Yahweh of hosts. But you say, how shall we return? And then he goes on talking about how they rob him of tithe and offerings and things like that. But the idea here, who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? And then he talks about this refining process. Now, if we think about refining process, now Yahweh is not into idolatry, but if we think about when we make things out of gold and silver, this refining process, it has to be melted down at a certain temperature, the dross, all the impurities come out. If gold and silver had emotions and feelings, this is not a pleasant experience. This is a crushing, this is a trial, this is a tribulation. It's hard on the gold and silver. It doesn't want to go through this process. But what happens is, once you get that gold and silver in a pure state, if you're going to make it into a shape, you put it in a mold, you put it in a container. And then after that's done, it's solidified. Now it's able to stand in whatever type of format you've set it. So if Mike Heiser talked about, the idea of when you look in the garden, in all the pagan religions, the way they have their temples set up, you have this building, this edifice that's meant to hold the deity. And then you go in there, and somewhere in there you have an idol that's meant to represent the image or the deity. And so Michael Heiser, he would take that back to the garden, and he'd say, well, creation, and we have scriptures that talk about this, creation itself is like the temple of Yahweh. Buildings of stone can't contain him. His own creation is kind of where he lives. And in the garden, he placed man, and it says he made mankind in his image. So you have this really kind of abstract way of man is kind of a representation to creation of Yahweh, the same way the pagans do. They do idols of silver and gold, wood and stone to represent their gods. We don't need that, because humankind itself is the image of the one who created us. And so, but this idea of standing, we're not a good representation to Yahweh's creation of our Creator if we're falling over, if like the statue of Dagon, when they brought the Ark of the Covenant into his temple, he fell over and crashed, that's not a good look for Dagon, the god of the Philistines. So if we, as the people of Yahweh, we as his representatives, people made in his image, if we're constantly crumbling and not being able to bear up under the weight of just trial and tribulation, it doesn't look good for Yahweh, especially when this whole book talks about how he's going to provide for his people, And Moses was like, if you destroy these people, Yahweh, all these nations are going to say, oh, he took them out of the land of Egypt and he couldn't even bring them into the land of the Canaan. Like, and it just makes Yahweh look bad. So ultimately, we have to endure to the end because Yahweh said he was going to help us endure to the end. And if we don't endure to the end, it not only reflects on us, but it also reflects on him. So we're going to close out real quick our last scripture. We're going to go to 1 Corinthians 10. This is going to introduce a new word. We're going to go back into the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 10. We're going to read verses 1 through 15. And my Zondervan New American Standard has this headed, Avoid Israel's Mistakes. For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Messiah. Nevertheless, with most of them Elohim was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. Now these things happened as examples for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. Nor let us act immorally, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day. Nor let us try the master, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the serpents. Nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. We started off in Mark 13, talking about the end of the age, things that are going to happen. And he talked about enduring till the end. Now I mentioned earlier, in that immediate context, he's talking on the macro scale, the big picture. He's talking about humanity. He's talking about his people as a whole. But we don't get to be a part of that group unless we endure till the end individually. Let's see here. We were in verse 12. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall. No temptation has overtaken you, but that which is common to man. And Elohim is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation, he will provide a way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. There's that word endure. Now, this is a Strong's G2476. This is a different word for endure than we read earlier, and it's the word histemi. King James translates it as stand, set, establish, stand still, stand by, different variations of stand. Now, if you track this back to the Hebrew, we already read this word in the Hebrew. We have the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And when we see Greek words in the New Testament, sometimes we see those same Greek words in the Septuagint. And if we know where we're at, we can take that Greek word and we can go see what the Hebrew word is there, and we can say this Greek word equals this Hebrew word. And that's what we're going to do here, but we're going to keep reading down through verse 15 before we get that far. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men, you judge what I say. So if we're not wise, we're not going to understand this. But he's talking about, A, temptation. And in our English, when we think of temptation, we tend to think of like, somebody seducing somebody in a naughty way, so to speak, or flattery, these types of things. Politicians giving promises, knowing they're not going to keep them. These things. But temptation, it can also mean trial or testing. So like sometimes we're given these things as a way to test us. Will this person take the bait? But sometimes it's just troubles that come upon us. Like when Job was tested, it wasn't like, hey, Job, I'm covering your body in boils. Come serve me. That's not how it was going on. It wasn't trying to pull Job away per se, but it was testing him to see how he would endure. But this word here for endure, this Strong's G2476, is a match. We already read this word earlier, and we'll just go back to it. Genesis 18, verse 2. Genesis 18, verse 2. Hopefully we remember what this was. And it appeared multiple times in this chapter, but this is Yahweh and the two messengers appearing before Abraham. This is the first time the word for stand or endure is mentioned in the whole word, at least in the Hebrew. And it's this same word that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians about enduring. This is where it says, when he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold him, 3 men were standing opposite him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. And so, this whole idea of standing, like it's a multi-tiered thing. Enduring to the end. He who endures to the end will be saved, which implies that if you don't endure to the end, you won't be saved. Now, if we think salvifically, you don't get to stand before the Father for all eternity unless you're saved. We know that. So you have to endure to the end in your personal life. And as we go through the end times, assuming we're in that age, whoever that falls on, you kind of need to endure through that too. But the idea is that if you get to that point, you've endured till the end and you are saved, you get to stand before him. You get to be in his presence. And I can't imagine anyone more appropriate to lean on than Yahweh. Like he's not going to fail. We get into the book of, and I didn't bring the verse here, but when the king of Assyria is coming after King Hezekiah, and King Hezekiah he's freaking out, he's trembling because Assyria was the most mighty nation on the earth at that point, and they're coming after Judah. And he sends his emissary to the king, and he's publicly talking about, you guys want to go down to Egypt, and you want to make an alliance with Egypt because you think that's going to get you out of serving us. You think they're going to help you against Assyria. And he says, Egypt is like a reed, that if a man leans upon it, it breaks and pierces his hand. So like if you imagine a reed is a hollow stick and it's flimsy, if you're going to lean on something, you want it to be solid. You need something that's not going to break. Otherwise, why do that? He's saying if you lean on them, if you go to Egypt for support, for sustenance, if you hope Egypt is going to help you endure my onslaught against you, Egypt's going to crumble and they're going to fail and it's going to end up wounding you. Without getting too graphic, a torture method is to take bamboo shoots and poke people with them under the fingernails and stuff because it can be very sharp. Woodwind players, they have reeds. The edges of a reed on a clarinet or something, you can cut yourself with those sometimes. It's such a fine point because this is the type of wood that would do that. And so this is what he's saying. If you lean on Egypt, if you try to have Egypt endure with you, it's going to fail. You won't endure. So for me, the moral of the story of this is looking at these concepts all together, and we could have pulled in a bunch more scriptures, but I wanted to keep it kind of concise. If we're going to stand, if we're going to endure until the end, we have to be prepared to sustain ourselves internally. So our internal stuff that happens, the psychological things, the spiritual things that happen inside of us, we have to get ourselves to a point to where we're strong enough to hold ourselves together. But no human being is strong enough to hold themselves together all the time. So that's where we have this idea of having people we can lean on and having people that can support us when we're starting to fall apart, when we're starting to lose control, when we're starting to collapse. And we kind of all get through it together. But if we don't do if none of us prepare, then when the time comes, none of us are going to stand. They say a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And so my challenge to everyone in the room here and whoever sees this later is to take a look at your personal life and the micro and figure out what are the things that I can do that I can take control of my life right now to make myself stronger. What are my weak points? One of my weak points is I'm scatterbrained. I forget things, important things sometimes. I don't make a ton of mistakes, but I tend to, if I make a mistake, it's a big one and, sometimes expensive. These are things I need to work on. These are things within my control. And one of my objectives is to tighten things up so that that's not a weak point for me. But when we get beyond that, and sometimes times just get too hard, no matter how prepared you are, you're that boxer in the ring and you're doing the best you can. You've gone into round 12 and you're completely out of steam and you just have to lean onto the ropes and just wait for that last bell. And then, that's where in this analogy, we are the ropes. We should be there to hold each other up as we're taking the abuse, as we're taking the pummeling, and hopefully endure to the end. So how do we endure to the end? We keep calm because we know ultimately Abba's got it, just like Elijah. There's multiple ways for Yahweh to provide for his people. But we have to have the fortitude to lean into that and trust him. And we have to understand that just like with Elijah, Yahweh didn't just walk up to the cave and say, "Hey, Elijah, it's me, Yahweh. Here's some food." That would be great, but that's not what happened. He used the ravens and he used other people to provide that for Elijah. And that's how he does with humans. He uses us to provide for us. And so getting used to that idea as a community and as a tribe, I think, is the only way we're going to endure to the end, because no individual is going to be strong enough. But maybe with the community, and maybe if we all yield, to Yahweh's covenant and His ways, then we will endure to the end. So hopefully that all makes sense. Hopefully that was encouraging, and there's a lot more that could be expounded on if we wanted to do a multi-part series, but I don't have a series in me right now, so we're kind of keeping it to a one-part here. At this point, I'll open the floor for any questions, comments, strong opinions.